Well, it looks like we're live. I'm Matt Kundle from the Sound Off Podcast. I don't normally do these things live. The last time I did this live was with Dean Blundell, who's also with Crier Media, and he loves doing things live. But I got my old friend Charles Adler back with me. We've been friends for so many years. How far back do we go, Charles?
Not more than 300 years, I don't think. Maybe 400?
Yeah. I started at Corus in 2006, and you were doing a show based out of Winnipeg, and I had just arrived in Winnipeg, and it was a national radio show, and you were kind enough, as time went by, to invite me on your program every once in a while to bring some common sense to your Common Sense show, which was being broadcast nationally.
Well, you were kind enough to lend us your big brain, so why would I turn that down?
In the radio world, it was very AM and very FM. You did the AM part, and I was taking care of the FM part, which was relegated, of course, to the basement of 930 Portage Avenue in Winnipeg. But over the years, thank you, by the way, for inviting me on your show. I had so much fun.
Well, thank you for coming up from the basement.
It was a good opportunity to get out of the basement. The last time I had you on this show, I had to check this. It was 2019. It was the before times, Charles.
The before times.
Before the pandemic.
Before podcasting.
And pandemic.
Before, that's right. It's kind of like AD and BC, before Christ and after death of Christ. So we've got before pandemic and after pandemic. And we don't know exactly how much the world has changed, but we know something is happening.
Indeed it is. I can't believe it's been since 2019 since I had you on, and so much has changed. I think at the one point I had you going back onto satellite radio. You did a stint at
Sirius XM,
Sirius XM, and then you did another stint at Corus again, and then that ended, and well, here you are.
Some hearts have stints, and others have stints, and I've done lots of stints over the course of half a century. And they have been all wonderful in the sense of you learn something from every one of them. Some are less pleasant than others, but nevertheless, you learn. And to use the old expression, which I guess is another one we can add to the list of politically incorrect expressions, you can't keep a good man down.
No, and you're back with Crier Media. And I'll give a little backstory. My company works with Crier Media, and we're going to be producing your show when it launches in the next few weeks. But how did you get together to sign with Dean Blundell and Crier Media?
I think you did that. I think you had something to do with it. I was having coffee with you one day. Well, okay, but all I know is, okay, so correlation and causation are not necessarily on the same planets. But all I know is one day I'm having coffee with you, and you're telling me about Dean Blundell and some of the other folks that you're associated with at Crier and how fond you are of them. And the next thing I know, they're calling. So I, made the assumption, and I realized that, assumptions sometimes only require feelings and not facts. But I made the feeling-based assumption that you said something kind about me, because you always do, in this case to Dean, and that Dean was triggered to do the right thing.
And Dean got very excited, and normally, like I've always worked with the independent podcasters, we give them a chance and a voice to get out there and do the thing. And like you said, tough to keep a good man down. And I mean, you're active and alive and well. I'm not here to say that you've retired to Florida anytime soon, because you've been quite active on Twitter. And I know you're somebody who counts your analytics, and so you are active politically on Twitter. That is a form of broadcast.
It is, and I do Ryan Jesperson's show. I mean, I've done a bunch of shows as a guest, but I'm a regular guest with Ryan on Real Talk. You've had Ryan on this podcast before. He is one of the very, very best that I've ever worked with, and so I'm honored to be associated with Ryan. I'm honored to be associated with you and with Dean Blundell.
What do you think of people like Ryan who've been shown the door by Corus, told their work is not wanted, and the next thing you know, you can do what we're doing right now in an independent fashion?
Well, you know, I mean, a company can just say that they don't want you associated with their company. You know, whatever. That's their choice. It's a free country, despite what some people on Twitter like to say. They're free to do that. And Ryan is free to go on with his life and access his audience. You know, my whole life has been small family business. That's kind of, you know, where my head got into this world in my dad's little tailor shop. And so my dad taught me when I was, 6, 7, that the customer is always right. There are lots of ways to access the customer. The government expropriated my dad's store because he was in the way of a freeway they were building in Montreal. You know well, it's your hometown, the Decarie Expressway. So the Decarie Expressway needed to be built. My dad's store was in the way. They expropriated him. What did he do? He went a couple of clicks up the street and opened up another shop on Queen Mary Road. They couldn't keep Mike Adler down.
I didn't know that store had been expropriated to, for the world's greatest trench. One big giant traffic trench.
The big ditch.
Yeah. That part of Montreal, now down in, he moved over to Queen Mary and of course had his store on Queen Mary Road.
Yeah, and frankly, Queen Mary was a much better location for him. And I remember when he was moving there, my father taught me a lot about the small family capitalism. My father moved to an area where they already had 3 people who had stores very similar to his. And so I remember asking my dad, I was just, I guess, beyond toddler stage, 7, 8. I said, well, why are you moving to a neighborhood where they've got lots of people doing what you were doing? And he said, because if I move to that neighborhood, it will attract lots of customers for what I'm doing. And the customers will then make their choice. And within about 10 years, he was the only one left standing. And that's not to disparage his competitors, but really the market ends up deciding. And the market of customers for tailoring and dry cleaning became Mike Adler's customers.
How did you spend the pandemic?
Very isolated, doing radio in the most isolated way I could, which is odd. I did it from my home, and I'm doing podcasting from my home. And when I had to do radio from my home, I felt that I was, being punished by history because I love the smell of radio stations. Was it Robert Duvall and Apocalypse Now? I love the smell of napalm, the smell of, smells like freedom. So radio is what smells like freedom to me, and radio stations. But in this case, you had the pandemic. We had to do so. I felt not very good about it. I mean, it's easier to get home after the shift because you're already home, and there are some other advantages. I can be around my dogs, which I love. But I still missed the smell of a radio station. Now, in doing what I'm doing, I'm thinking about someday if things go right and the podcast world evolves as it should. I look forward to being in some kind of massive podcast studio with 50 or 100 screens somewhere in the world. It doesn't really matter to me where, because like you, I live inside my brain, and my brain still craves a big studio.
Do you think we'll go back to studios at all to get together in that? Because I think a lot of people have been sent home, and now we've got the workforce going, hey, I can work from home.
Yeah.
Is there a craving for people to go back to work? I know you have it, but do other people have that same sort of sense to get back?
I don't know. I'm not trying to say that I don't care. I mean, I care intellectually. I guess I've got some interest in that, but emotionally, I love the camaraderie of being with fellow pros, whether it's called broadcasting, podcasting, communications. It doesn't really matter to me. Those are just infrastructure issues. But as far as working with some other people who are involved in creative activity, old expression, 1 and 1 is 3. If you're working with the right people, the collective agency of that is going to get you somewhere. I think to higher ground. So if you're asking me the question, do I miss working with fellow professionals in the same room, the same studio? Yeah, I do, and I don't apologize for that. If other people prefer doing it solo, that's fine. We're all individuals, but this individual misses the big communications factory.
What do you think the legacy of media and the pandemic is going to be? Because you spent some time on Twitter. You took a small break at some point because it did become quite toxic, and then there you are, you're back again on it, and you're seeing, what's gone on. I guess this is my way of saying and asking, what's happened to people?
I think there's an anger out there, and I think a lot of it comes from isolation. I think we are social beings. Social media is kind of an ironic name because social media has done more to get the antisocial out of people than anything I can imagine. I'm not suggesting that all of us have turned into the Unabomber, but I don't think that social media has improved the world. It has not improved our reactions to our fellow human beings. Obviously, I'm generalizing because I'm talking about an entire planet. Social media in many ways is very convenient, but in other ways, it turns people into shut-ins. And I just don't think that we're rocks on islands. I think that we're human beings who crave affirmation from our fellow human beings. We crave fellowship. We crave fraternity, sorority. I don't know what the politically correct term is. I still split things into he and she. Sorry about that. But I think that the real world for real human beings, for the most part, there is a small percentage, just like in any group, there's a small percentage that are anomalous. They don't apply to this, but I would say that well over 90% of human beings thrive in the company of fellow human beings, and social media has walled people off from each other and created what I guess the term that's often used now is silos. I prefer silos for grain as opposed to human beings, but we're on these little island silos, whatever you want to call them, and we're only commiserating with people on social media platforms who agree with everything we're saying. So they don't challenge us, we don't challenge them. That's a Faustian bargain.
I find it rather odd that a lot of people will say things on social media, but then when I meet them, they don't come off nearly as crazy because they would never say all that crazy stuff to me in front of my face. And I find there's more common ground with people when we do get together and talk and speak rationally, but social media is quite an irrational land.
Well, it's also phony. I mean, or to use a more polite term, performative. People are performing. They're performing roles. They're arch right-wingers or far right-wingers, and they're far left-wingers or progressives. I think a lot of it is frankly silly. I think it's silly that if a person is a conservative, but they say some things that don't apply to the modern conservative model, they're castigated as commies and socialists and what have you. It's juvenile, and it doesn't really accomplish very much except for the troll farmers. And the troll farmers absolutely love Twitter and other social media platforms. I mean, it gets them what they're looking for, chumps.
A lot of people, and I'm not going to ask you to put you exactly where you think you belong on the entire scale of a political spectrum, which I'm not even sure it is a scale of any sort. It's could be just one big football field at this point. But a lot of people will say that you're not really speaking for conservatives anymore. And they'll say, well, you've gone a little bit I think you've gone liberal. I've heard just about every accusation, made about you and seen it on Twitter. And it feels weird. And it's like, they've changed. No, you changed. And everybody wants to put everybody into a slot and not really listen to anybody's perspective anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I have always seen myself as a small C conservative. I'm fairly traditional. I am for criminal justice being applied correctly. I think that some people do belong in prison for a very, very long time. They have rights. I think that we all have a right to a certain amount of the most important freedom, which to me is freedom from fear. And the only way that we can cut down on fear, on needless fear, is for government to be strong and for government to enforce the laws. We talk about Canada being about peace, order, and good government. I am very pro-Canadian. I'm very pro-Canadian democracy. And for most of my adult life, I felt that the progressive conservative movement was the most Canadian of movements. But the progressive conservatives died, and I have to just sort of admit that, that the bugle has been blown, taps have been blown for progressive conservatives, and so you now have this radicalized Reform Party that is called the Conservative Party of Canada. That name means nothing to me, because conservatism to me is a lot more refined, a lot more intelligent, a lot more human than the Conservative Party of Canada. And so when I say things like that, whether they're on Twitter or here on this podcast, conservative stalwarts, the Pierre Poilievre crowd will say that I'm a socialist or a liberal or whatever the label of convenience is, whatever label is getting them the most amount of clicks. But no, I don't identify with them at all.
Safe to say that the party died in 2003?
Yeah. I mean, they're under Peter MacKay, I understand why he did what he did. He did his deal with Stephen Harper, and he did his deal in good faith. And I don't think that most of Peter MacKay believed that the Conservatives, once they united, once the alliance united with the Progressive Conservatives, I don't think that Peter MacKay, who I happen to be a fan of, as you can tell, I don't think that Peter MacKay thought that the Harper Conservatives would spend the next few years devouring the Progressive Conservatives, trying as much as possible to smear them as people who aren't really conservative and aren't good conservatives and aren't good Canadians and all of that. And I think that that over the last number of years has only gotten worse. I'm very big on addition. I'm not big on subtraction. And I think the modern day conservative movement has eliminated a lot of people. I don't think that I'm the only one. I think there are many of us who feel orphaned, and I don't mean to speak for you, Matt, but have a feeling that for the most part we're on the same page on this.
Yeah, a shout out, by the way, to Acadia University. Peter MacKay is a graduate of there, so am I. I just have to get that mentioned wherever I can. Okay. I don't know why I do it. I just do it. 2019 was when we spoke last. I can't remember if it was before or after the Peter MacKay famous line where he said that the Conservatives missed an open net. Yeah. And I feel that the last two elections have been that way, that they are genuinely missing an open net to remove Trudeau from office, or at least get a minority government out of it. It seems like in the past the math would have added up. You can get a couple maritime provinces in Quebec, but I don't think you can start building an election by Kenora.
Well, yeah, I mean, I honestly have never understood, when I say never, in the last number of years, I have not understood this thing that the Conservatives have of, well, we don't need half the country. We can just work on the western half of the country. And I'm a proud Westerner. I wasn't born in the West, but the West has become my adopted home, and Winnipeg is my adopted home. The places in Western Canada where I have been most at home were Winnipeg and Calgary. And everybody who pays attention to what I do on Twitter or pays attention over the years, I've said that loudly and proudly. But I have no idea, even though despite my faithfulness and my political proclivities and all the rest of it, I do not understand why the Conservative Party pretends that it does not have to acknowledge the mathematical power of Quebec and the mathematical power of the parts of Ontario that it has trouble winning for all of the self-evident reasons. They don't appeal to new Canadians. They don't appeal to people who are second and third generation Canadians, sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters of immigrants. And I'm an immigrant myself. It's very easy for me to plug into it. It doesn't matter whether I immigrated in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 90s, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. I have no trouble understanding how immigrants and the children and grandchildren of immigrants feel. And the modern day Conservative Party, I'd say the post-Peter MacKay Conservative Party, alienates multiple millions of Canadians. It makes no sense to me. It's not about morality. It's not about ethics. It's about mathematics. In the end, everything is about math.
So I look at Joel McLeod, who hosts a podcast on Crier Media. I think the 905 podcast, I think that's what it's called. And apologies if I got that wrong. But they talk about what goes on in the 905. And I think for many years, conservatives and liberals have taken a look at this area just outside of Toronto. I think it's, Markham North, and sort of it's everywhere around Toronto. And how blue can you make it? And if you can make it blue, then the conservatives have a chance. But how does it look right now for conservatives to maybe pull some, like, the majority of seats out of the 905?
Terrible.
Yeah.
I know every inch of 905 because I spent several years working in Ontario. And when I was in Ontario, I was a professional moonlighter. I had a job and then I had 2 or 3 side hustles. It's just the way it was, which means I spent a lot of time on the 401 and the 400 and the QE, and I know every inch of 905. And so it's very, very easy for me to understand why conservatives don't do well there. They did very well there when Jason Kenney, this is the Premier Jason Kenney, the other Jason Kenney, the one I was very good friends with. Jason Kenney understood 905. By the way, Jason Kenney, a lot of people think because Jason Kenney was the Premier of Alberta and he's well known for being an MP from Alberta and a cabinet minister from there. Jason Kenney was actually born in 905. He was born in Oakville, Ontario, another one of the many stomping grounds of mine. And so if you know Mississauga and you know Milton and you know Oakville and you know all those areas, you know who's been moving into those areas for the last 10, 20, 30 years. You look at all that and then you look at some of the rhymes and the slogans on Pierre Poilievre's Twitter, and you say to yourself, what the hell does that have to do with these folks? How does it represent these folks? It doesn't work.
So walk me back into, again, the pandemic and Jason Kenney is Premier of Alberta, and I think you and him went at it on Twitter.
Yeah. No, we went at we didn't really go at. We went at it on the air.
Yeah.
About I guess a little. This is June, and it was April of 4 years ago. So approximately 50 months ago, we went at it on the air.
What was it about?
It was about a candidate of his who had said some really ridiculous things, pandering to his social conservative audience in a church. So he was doing a lay pastor thing. He was the guest pastor, and he talked about women killing their babies. Abortion is what he was talking about, but he insisted on talking about women killing their babies, and then he insisted on the idea that men cannot love men. His homophobic message or anti-LGBT message, and it was really hideous stuff. And so I had Kenny listen to it. Not that he hadn't heard it before, although he said he hadn't heard it before. I guess I'll have to take his word for it, even though he did a news conference about it a day earlier. I don't know how he would have done a news conference about it if he hadn't listened to it. But anyway, he did not want to take this candidate out of the UPC, but essentially the Alberta conservative ecosystem. I didn't expect him to tell people not to vote for the candidate. This was just a couple of weeks before the election. I expected he would do what both of us had agreed on the air about a year earlier an Alberta conservative leader would do if they had a so-called bozo eruption. A previous leader of the Wild Rose Party, who happens to be the Premier now, Danielle Smith, had a problem with a candidate who was massively homophobic. It was known as the Lake of Fire sermon. And Danielle Smith did not want to disassociate the party from him, and that cost her the election. So Jason Kenney and I just talked about this on the air the same way as we went off the air. And on the air, we both agreed that if something like this were to happen to his party, his United Conservative Party down the road, that he would simply say something like, look, this candidate is on the ballot, and it's a democracy, and if people in the riding want to vote for the candidate, that's their democratic option. However, I want the people in that particular riding, in this case an Alberta riding, I'd want them to know that that candidate will not be seated with the caucus, because that candidate doesn't represent the values of Alberta, the values of the United Conservative Party, Jason Kenney's values. And I expected Kenney to say precisely that about this particular candidate. And he didn't. He went into I don't know what you want to call it, the political mode. And I felt really insulted. And on a personal level, I felt betrayed because I felt I had his word that he wouldn't go forward with this kind of nonsense, and there was an easy way out, and I thought he would take it. Plus, I just thought from a polling perspective, I mean, he was well into the double digits ahead of the NDP. There was no doubt who was going to win. And so the idea that he was desperate to pander to the people in that riding doesn't make any sense, didn't make any sense. And it's not like that candidate was going to lose that riding. You know, we know that in many ridings in Alberta and other parts of the country, people are cemented to their political brand. And it doesn't really matter what the name is, because in the overwhelming majority of cases, people can decide 70%, 80%, 90% of the time that people aren't voting for the candidates anyway. They're voting for the political party. So he had no downside, and I don't know why he chose to do what he did. But, you know, it basically put my own credibility on the line. I was known as a friend of Jason Kenney, and I was until, I guess, that night when the friendship was torn asunder. But I certainly wasn't going to have him destroy my credibility. I certainly wasn't going to sit there and go, okay, I think, thanks, Mr. Kenney. Now let's go on to talk about oil prices. I didn't let go. I was a dog with a bone. And then I had to ask him a few character questions related to his past stuff that was on the record, and he failed the character test that night, and I guess both of us failed the friendship test.
Why is it that so much of the nonsense that goes on is permitted? And I don't want to say that there's no cost to it, but there doesn't seem to be any personal cost when a politician, throws out a bunch of nonsense. I think there's a cost to the party. I don't think some of these parties are performing nearly as well as they could because of the nonsense. It scares off maybe the progressive side, or I guess anybody with a social conscience from voting. But how come people aren't paying personally anymore for incendiary views?
Well, because the people involved in what we do are really afraid to alienate them. You know, they feel that they're absolutely connected to the audience that has these people as their heroes. So a lot of people in my position simply would have let go, would have asked a couple of questions of Jason Kenney about that issue and then moved on to something else, because they wouldn't want to alienate him, and they wouldn't want to alienate his staff, and they wouldn't want to alienate the social media that his staff gets involved with, and they wouldn't want to alienate his base. And that's just not, I'm not trying to be sanctimonious about it. That's just not a game that I'm willing to play. You know, ultimately, I work for my conscience. I don't work for a company. I don't work for the company I'm contracted with. I was contracted with Corus. I've got a contract now with Crier, and that's those are business relationships. But I didn't work for Corus or for Crier. I work for my conscience. And if I am asked to do, and I'm not suggesting Corus asked me to do anything, and Crier's not asking me to do anything, but if I feel that I'm now having to work for the conservative base and not my own conscience, well, frankly, that is, to me, unconscionable. It just goes against my ethics. People can choose to follow whatever ethical, whatever moral compass they wish to follow. I follow Mike Adler's moral compass, my late father. He's on my shoulder all the time. I'm not trying to creep anybody out. I think a lot of people feel this way about the people who they've been very, very closely associated with, mentored by, and even though they're now technically in the past tense, the spirit of my dad is with me at all times, and I'm not going to do anything to embarrass him. I'm not going to do anything to embarrass the family name. And on that night in April of 4 years ago, had I just rolled over like a rug for Jason Kenney, that would have embarrassed Mike Adler a great deal.
I sometimes wonder when leaders make decisions, I think they're going for social media clicks more than they're going for political power. It's almost like the game is over if they, gain political power, because then they would have to govern, and governing is hard. And in terms of being an effective opposition, I'm not seeing a lot of effective opposition, across the country anywhere.
No, you're right. I mean, they're going for clicks. They're going for donations. Their staffs are going for clicks and donations the moment their boss says anything, they're immediately on Instagram or Twitter, TikTok, whatever it is, whatever their favorite platforms are, to see what kind of bang, what kind of coverage their leaders are getting on social media. That becomes the big metric. It's kind of crazy anyway, because so much of social media reaction is not even real. It's just driven by the algorithms that the troll farmers are so good at exercising. And Matt, I don't know whether this is a time when we should actually do a little bit of splaining, and I'm more into entertaining than I am into explaining, because I also want to keep the audience. I don't want to lose them by going deep into the policy weeds. But is it worth talking a little bit about how fake so much of what social media is all about, in terms of the incendiary reaction that's coming from people who don't even really exist?
Yeah, absolutely. We should talk about that. I mean, I find myself just scrolling past it because I know it's not real. Fake accounts, bots, just so much junk that's out there, and of course stuff that's driven and funded by dark money, I guess.
Yeah, dark money. Sometimes that money is from foreign powers. Sometimes it's just dark money that is associated with a particular ideology. So when that particular ideology is programming, let's say, algorithms to go after people who criticize the Conservatives, whether it's the Conservatives in the UK or the Conservatives in the USA or Canada, it doesn't matter. When certain dark money is programming those algorithms, you end up the moment you say something that is not complimentary of the Conservative movement, all of a sudden, all these replies end up in your Twitter replies, and I've said to people in so many different ways, just ignore that stuff. It's not real. It's not relevant. It doesn't represent the country. It just represents a fact of life in social media that this is called dark money is a nice way of putting it. Certain people are invested in their message. In this case, the right-wing message being the only message. And if anybody wants to contradict it, they're going to be slammed, they're going to be bashed, they're going to be smeared, and that will drive away those people who want to publicly criticize the dark money message.
So there's a lot of accusation that American-style right-wing politics, those strategies have come to Canada. But if I were to look at that, it looks like a loser book. Trump lost 3 elections, really. He lost the House, he lost the Senate, lost the presidential election. So I don't know why anybody would want to hook themselves to that wagon. And then the midterms came up. And midterms, that's a gimme. There's the open net again. You should be able to make some substantial gains. And they did not. So Democrats wound up making some key gains during the midterms on not a great record from Joe Biden. And I think what it really came down to was candidates. How strong were the candidates? And they ran, the Republicans ran real losers. And I think this comes back to, just about anywhere, that if you're going to run losers, you're going to lose.
Well, losers get you the wrong kind of publicity.
Yeah.
And, in the most recent U.S. midterms, they went whole hog into this so-called pro-life message. By the way, I don't really understand how forcing women to stay pregnant, even if they've been raped, even if they've been incested, I don't understand how you can call that pro-life. I mean, it's such an inhuman thing. Torturing people is not pro-life. That's just, there it is. My so-called progressive opinion. That's what makes me a progressive conservative. To me, there's nothing traditionally human about forcing women into any kind of behavior that they choose not to be in, because you're wrapping yourself in some interpretation of what the Lord wants. I'm just not on that train. But in any case, many of the conservative candidates, many of the Republican conservatives during the midterms who won their primaries, and remember, primaries are only voted in by the most active, by the most partisan of the players, whether they're partisan Democrats or partisan Republicans. They don't represent the massive Republicans or the massive Democrats. That's one of the reasons why sometimes the House of Representatives is not really representative of the American public. I don't want to go too far into that field either, except to say that in the midterms, many of these wacky, radical people ended up being candidates. And so a lot of people who ordinarily weren't Democrats voted for the Democrats because they just couldn't stomach these, freak show Republicans.
Does that sort of cast away the myth that people will just vote down ballot? They'll just Republican and then put X's all the way down. I think people are a little more choosy.
Well, a lot of people do vote that way, where they just vote the entire ballot. So everything from the president to the dog catcher is either all Republican or all Democrat. A lot of people do vote that way, but some don't. And of course, the midterms are a little different because there is no president to vote for in the midterms. You're voting much more local. Not as many people vote in the midterms. That's another story. But in general, I mean, the general proposition is that for those people who think that just running the most radical of people on the left and the most radical of people on the right, for people who think that's a good idea of bridging the divide, of uniting a country, whether it's called the United States or Canada, no, it's not a good way. And ultimately, it's not good for your political party either, because once again, if you're just thinking about addition and subtraction, you're subtracting people every time you do that. In the American context, if Marjorie Taylor Greene becomes your poster person, if that's your representative of the Republican Party, you will lose a lot of Republicans. You will lose a lot of moderates. You'll lose a lot of independents who might lean Republican but don't want to be in the same postal code. Excuse me, we're talking Americans. You don't want to be in the same zip code with Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Can you look to the future and tell me how you see it plays out for the Republicans with Trump and DeSantis?
Well, if Trump wins the nomination, and I still think that he is easily odds-on favorite to win the Republican nomination, I think that he can be relatively easily defeated by Biden, or if Biden chooses for age reasons. I'm not an ageist. I've been inveighing against ageism for the last few news cycles here. But if he chooses to think that he ought to turn the baton over to someone else, I think that someone else, for the most part, that someone else still has a good chance of beating Trump, simply because most of the independents who are generally center-right do not want to have Donald Trump back in the White House. There are some people who feel that DeSantis is a great candidate because he's very Trump-like, but he's a lot younger and he's done very well in Florida. I don't see DeSantis becoming president. I could be wrong. I think the Democrats are favored in any case for the oldest reasons. Most incumbents who are presidents, most presidential incumbents win 2 terms, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. Yes, there are anomalies, and George W. Bush's dad, George H.W. Bush, only won 1 term, but there are other people who say, well, he only won 1 term because he really was doing Reagan's 3rd term, and Ross Perot is involved, and that upset that particular apple cart. The thing is that unless the Democrats do something really foolish, unless something really horrible happens to the economy for the most part, or of course if there's a huge national security issue, but for the most part it's about the economy. Unless the economy craters in the next 18 months, I don't see the Democrats losing the White House.
So, by the way, we need to get a name for your studio that you have there. We should probably put it up for some naming rights. But I saw you took to Twitter from your studio and you talked about ageism. And I'm not sure if that spun out because people think Joe Biden's too old because he happened to take a fall the other day.
Yeah.
But, there was a time Reagan was 70 and we all thought that was too old. And now we're looking at Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden. It cuts across party lines. I mean, everybody is over 75.
Matt, would I destroy our friendship if I mentioned the little incident that happened just moments before we started podcasting today?
No, you go right ahead and talk about that accident I had.
So you seemed to trip over something. It was out of camera range, so I wasn't sure what you tripped over. So why don't you tell us what you tripped over?
So I put a new camera in. And by the way, I want to apologize to everybody for my whiteness today. I'm very white with this brand new it's not a it's a 1080p, so it's a fancy camera. And this is sort of what the Crier Media standard is that we want to have 1080p cameras. And now I've got a wide shot of my room. Anyway, I thought I would go and adjust the light. And it didn't, well, obviously wasn't terribly successful because my whiteness is just spilling out across the internet. But as I came around again, it fell over sideways and crashed. And I'm just thankful that it worked, or I'd be broadcasting in the dark right now. But there was an accident where it fell over sideways. And
so you must have had this accident because you're 80 years old and you're just too old for this, right? And I'm only making the point that Joe Biden tripped on a sandbag, as Matt Kundle could, as I could, as a million people could, whether they're 8 years old or 18 years old. Joe Biden happens to be 80. But the idea of going after him for being too old to be in the White House because he trips on a sandbag, something that could happen to any of us, is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
So let me throw out something a little more hypothetical. And let's say Joe Biden doesn't run, who would be the front runner?
Well, the immediate front runner would be the vice president, because that's quite traditional, and many people who are elders of the party tend to automatically vote at least support at the beginning the vice president. But that would be Kamala Harris. But Kamala Harris would still end up in a primary, and once you're in a primary, who knows where it goes. The last time she was in a primary, she didn't do very well at all. It may play differently as a vice president. I think the world of Kamala Harris, just to put it all on the record here, and I think she was an effective prosecutor. And when Kamala Harris was on Democratic Senate committees prosecuting some rather sleazy, ethically challenged people, I think Kamala Harris, carved them several new ones. I think she was excellent at that. Most people who see the Kamala Harris of today see a much, quote, softer version of the Kamala Harris that made it up the political ladder, as it were. However, once again, there would be a primary, there would be challenges from other people, so who knows? But if you're asking me who the front runner is right now, if Joe Biden steps aside, it would be the vice president.
Do you think Bernie Sanders has an impact on the next election?
No, I think without being ageist here, I mean, I could simply say, Bernie's past his due date, but I think that would be ageist. I don't think it's about Bernie's age, although I guess he's about the same age as Joe Biden. It's just that he's just been to the well for that job too often. And the other problem that Bernie Sanders has, and it's not even talked about in the States, never mind Canada. Bernie Sanders refuses to become a Democrat. I mean, I know this sounds crazy, but he keeps running for president as a Democrat, and he wants people to think that he's going to be available again and again and again to run for president. But Bernie Sanders doesn't like the Democratic Party. And that's fine. I mean, you can be an independent. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want everyone in the Democratic Party to take you seriously as someone who wants to be a standard bearer for the Democrats, at least join the party. Pay the $10 or $15 a year and be a member. It's just a little bit odd. And although some people say that doesn't really harm him at all, I've never believed that. I think it's always harmed him. But if anyone wants to go back to the Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump contest, I think it was Bernie Sanders that cost Hillary that job, because Bernie Sanders was very, very effective for months and months and months of inveighing against Hillary Clinton for two things. One, the vote that she cast to side with George W. Bush going into the war on Iraq. Hillary Clinton tried to spin that in a number of ways. Ultimately, she ended up apologizing for that vote. Bernie Sanders went after her day after day after day for voting to commit Americans to a war in Iraq. And the other thing that Bernie Sanders went after her on was the fact that she did all these speeches on Wall Street for Goldman Sachs and other firms, and that she didn't want to release the transcripts of those speeches, creating this impression that she said something to them that was politically untoward, and then that really cost her. Then, of course, there was the business about the emails, but Bernie Sanders didn't go after her on the emails. He went after her on her connections to Wall Street, to big money, and to the war in Iraq. And I think that cost her with a number of base Democrats, and I think it took them out of the campaign. They didn't want to vote for her. They didn't want to campaign for her. And I think that's what delivered Donald Trump a relatively room service election. I don't think we'd be talking about Donald Trump right now if it hadn't been for Bernie Sanders' efforts in that campaign to politically destroy Hillary Clinton.
And with an assist to the Russians?
Oh, yeah, the Russians get an assist. Lots of people, CNN gets an assist. I mean, even though CNN has spent a number of years, and of course there's a relatively new and different CNN right now, which I don't think is very good actually, but even though CNN positioned itself as very anti-Trump, CNN just kept giving Trump exposure because when Trump was on, viewership was up, and producers were just told to, let Trump call in anytime he wants to because it gets us viewers. And so I think CNN also contributed, and obviously Fox contributed. Fox was much more openly pro-Trump, and Trump was on Fox a lot. But Fox is, for the most part, the loyal Republican base. It's preaching to the choir. But with the Democrats and Republicans sharing a lot of viewers, and independents sharing a lot of viewers on CNN in the days when CNN had much bigger numbers, Trump being on CNN all the time really helped. It's impossible for me to sit here and not admit that CNN also played a role in the Trump era.
Well, I think both those networks are feeding into all sorts of Looney Tunes, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and the Jewish space lasers. And when I hear that stuff come out and all the nuttiness, what am I supposed to think about Hillary's emails and Hunter Biden's laptop? I don't even know if those are serious because I don't even think serious stuff is being reported. So how's anybody supposed to decipher what is truly a problem and what isn't?
I'm never going to say that Hunter Biden doesn't have severe personal problems. I mean, he obviously is a person who's required rehab for a reason. But of course, the Republicans have really dined out on the Hunter Biden thing. They've taken it to all sorts of interesting places, conspiratorial places. And as far as Hillary Clinton's email and the server, should she have had her own server? No. Did she make mistakes on that front? Yes. Did she wait way too long before offering explanations and apologies? Yes. Is Hillary Clinton a fabulous retail politician? No. But is Hillary Clinton better for American stability, for world stability? Is it better to have someone who wants to challenge Putin as opposed to kiss his ring? Of course she is. I mean, there's all sorts of lines about how you only have a limited amount of choices on the ballot. It's not between this particular choice and the Lord. It's this particular choice versus Donald Trump. To me, that was an easy choice, even though in the American context, and I worked in America for a number of years, nobody would have mistaken me for being a liberal Democrat or even a moderate Democrat. I was associated with the Republicans. I put all my cards on the table, just as I was associating Canada with the Conservatives. So these different people can tag me with all sorts of names and make claims that I've made these incredible changes and been Machiavellian and all the rest of the stuff that is ascribed to me. I don't think that at the core I'm any different today than I was when I was 7 years old working in my daddy's store.
What can we expect from your show?
You can actually expect what you're getting right now, Matt. You can expect someone who is spontaneous, someone who's, relatively speaking, animated, very alive, very tuned into what's going on right now, very tuned into the human condition. I think that I do still, over the years, despite more successes than any human being deserves, and therefore the privileges of those success, I think that I still have a a common touch. I don't think that age has taken it away from me. I don't speak any more slowly. I don't need people to complete my sentences for me. I do think I have 3 things that are absolute necessary ingredients for any personality who expects to command a significant audience. And those 3 things in this order are intelligence, a sense of humor, and the most important one, empathy. I still think that despite every nice thing that has happened to yours truly, I still think I can walk a mile in anyone's shoes. I think I'm a pretty good listener. And most important, and this once again introduces my father to this conversation. My father's the most honest person that I ever met. I'd love to be half as honest as my dad. Just incredible capacity for honesty, for integrity, for strong values. And I still think I'm a pretty honest guy. There was a great country song a number of years ago, more than 40 years ago, I guess, that in my brain was playing all the time. It's still on the turntable of my mind. It's by a country artist called John Connolly, called Common Man. I'm a common man, and I drive a common van, and my dog doesn't have a pedigree. Well, I don't drive a van, and my dog does have a pedigree, but I still think I'm in touch with the common man. I love that tune. I love the spirit of it, and that's who I am. And I think that whether it's a broadcast or a podcast, that still connects with common people.
Good. And you know, one of the things that you and I have talked about is the ability to go live. We're doing something live right now. You happen to be very good at it. Over the last number of years, my company has been working with on-demand audio, so I've learned to kind of turn audio into, think a little bit more Netflix when it comes to this stuff. But yeah, you're not afraid just to turn it on and turn on your computer and go live.
I've got, the thing is, and I'm not suggesting you're trying to conceal anything, because, we all have different needs for control, for perfection. And I don't mind being bruised up the odd time, having a little bit of a pie on my face, having a little crow to eat. But I do love live. I love the energy of live. I love knowing that right now we are in the moment with people. There's an energy to that I really relish. It's the sandbox that I play in.
Good. Well, we're going to get you some pathways out there. I mean, YouTube, Twitter, which I know you're active on every single day. And if you're not following Charles, do so right now. It's at Charles Adler. Super easy to do that. It's kind of actually, and Twitter is changing as well. Twitter is now becoming a little bit, more live. I think Elon Musk has, opened it up to Donald Trump a bit. Who's the other guy? Oh, Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson's now taken his act to Twitter. And so, it's becoming a little bit more of more video heavy, and there's certainly a little bit more content out there to be consumed.
I prefer, by the way, Twitter's been very good to me for the most part, and it's gotten me a lot of play, a lot of exposure with really good people around the world. If anyone is looking for me to become a Twitter basher, not happening. I'm not here to stroke Elon Musk or any of the people that you've talked about. That's not the issue at all. To me, the issue is, does the platform allow me to access as many good people as possible on this good planet? Yes, it does. And as long as it does, I'm with Twitter.
I found it really interesting that a lot of people decided to go and leave Twitter for whatever reason, and then they realized that their audiences don't live in other places necessarily. And from I think it was Edison Research that, do their homework on Twitter. Might have been Tech Survey from Jacobs Media, but the numbers didn't drop for Twitter. Twitter usage is the same as it ever was.
Yeah.
And the CBC left, and then they came back. I thought that was humorous.
Is the CBC back on Twitter?
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
welcome back.
It's kind of like, we're leaving. Okay, we're back. Charles, thanks so much for doing this and joining me on the podcast.
Thank you, and you never have to apologize. I gotta say something, folks. One of the reasons I'm so happy to be associated with Matt Cundall is because he is so meticulous when it comes to audio and video, and you have no idea how difficult this is for him today. Because on this particular podcast, he does not have the exact lighting that he wants. He's convinced it makes a difference in terms of getting out his message. It doesn't. You're beautiful. I love you, and I love being associated with you.
Thanks, Charles.